context for this crash right here. You see the beat mode extreme just absolutely cut off on me.
I'm gonna disqualify that statement immediately. It's not a cutout in the sense of what we're expecting. So a cutout means that the wheel did not function as expected, and so it cut out. This was not a cutout per se.
Cut off, it should have not cut out until that final sequence of beeps.
Not necessarily. The wheel can actually cut out prior to ending the sequence of beeps, especially if you're over torquing it.
If you look at this, it goes beep, beep, before I could even react to hearing that first beep.
That's due to over torquing. All right, welcome back to the channel, guys. This is Ustride once again. So today we're going to discuss part 2 of how to accelerate your uke, a demonstration. And we're going to focus on part C of my last video in order to attempt to diagnose Chooch's crash of the extreme, all right? Oh, also, we're going to do a response or a comparison between Chooch's crash and Ronin Rider's 50-mile-per-hour ride of the extreme, okay? What's the difference between these two videos? And what do they prove? All right, so we're gonna do a quick analysis of the video from Chooch. It's not a long video, so let's just get right into it. First, we see he's properly clothed. He has his knee guard, helmet, lazy rolling jacket. I know that because I already watched the video. And he has boots, like I like to wear as well. So let's go with it. So what you notice is, okay, that it did beep. It's not like the wheel just cut out and there was no beep. So the wheel is functioning as expected. It's just that it looks like there might have been something else afoot, okay? Now what I'm noticing is he is leaning forward. Now you don't necessarily have to lean forward with your shoulders and your head in order to get a good acceleration or even over torque the wheel. What you can also do, as you can see over here, right? You see that his foot, or at least his toes, is at the very tip of the front part of the pedal. So he could possibly be, in addition to leaning with his shoulders and his head, he could also be pressing into the pedal to gain some momentum, gain some torque, gain some good acceleration there. Now, here's the first beep. Now, the first beep, obviously, again, that's just the wheel doing its thing, letting you know, hey, I've reached the limit. The beeps are very strange. They don't really distinguish themselves that much, except for the rate at which they beep. They're the same beep, okay? Beep, 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 or beep, 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 beep. You know what I'm saying? So it's really, if you're moving at that rate of speed, it's really hard to distinguish between the beeps. So let's go back again. Let's see how many beeps we heard before it actually cuts out. Now, we're not gonna be able to tell exactly when it cut out, but we can at least assume via the video when the wheel starts to tilt forward. So I see 3 beeps before this thing starts to tilt over. Could he have pulled back? Possibly, but if this helmet is in the way and he can't hear the beeps, that's highly unlikely. And my guess is he does not have any monitoring apps, because if he did, it would have come through the earpiece if that's his setup. That is my setup, by the way. But even then, if you're really torquing it, it's not gonna matter. In my case at Apple Valley Speedway, I cut out and there was no beeps at all, because the setup I had was for the speed, not for over torquing or current draw. So let's see how many beeps that was. So there were 3 beeps before the cutout, and there was a 4th beep, so the wheel is still functioning. 5, 6. So 3 beeps before it cut out, and it just continues to beep while it's cutting out. And then the aftermath.
Okay, so some context for this crash right here. You see the beat mode extreme just absolutely cut off on me. You can go back and look at the slow-mo footage and you can see that it was a cutoff, because if it wasn't a cutoff...
Well, it's not a cutout. I'm gonna disqualify that statement immediately. it's not a cutout in the sense of what we're expecting. So a cutout means that the wheel did not function as expected, and so it cut out. This was not a cutout per se. It is a cutout, but it was a cutout well within the limits of the wheel. You understand what I'm saying? So when someone says my wheel cut out, if you're riding at a high rate of speed or a slow speed or whatever, that assumes that the wheel is not functioning as expected and the wheel just cut out. That's the gist you get when someone says that. My wheel cut out. That means the wheel kind of had a mishap. In this scenario, that's not the case. The wheel didn't just cut out. There were at least 3 beeps prior to cutting out. And while these beeps were occurring, we see that he was leaning forward. So there was an aggressive lean forward in order to gain acceleration. So the wheel was operating well within its requirements.
Cut off. It should have not cut out until that final sequence of beeps was...
Not necessarily. If we look at the video, that was the final sequence of beeps. The wheel can actually cut out prior to ending the sequence of beeps, especially if you're over torquing it. So that's the thing about the beeps. The beeps are not an end-all be-all. The beeps are literally warning signs. So it's not that, you know, the wheel is beeping, so I'm gonna continue to push past the beeps and hopefully it'll last you know, before it dips forward where I could have the chance to pull back. No, you can actually cut a wheel out when it starts to beep versus that continuous beep. You see what I'm saying? All you have to do is over torque it. And if your battery is already at a low rate, chances are if you're leaning into it at a low rate and your motor is probably not up to par, etc., you're gonna cut that thing out well before the sequence of beeps.
It's over with, and it cut out within, like, if you look at this, it goes beep, beep, before I could even react to hearing that first beep.
That's due to over torquing, okay? So the fact that he said that, you know, the wheel cut out well before the sequence of beep, 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 I heard 3 until it started to cut out. The issue is that if you're already over torquing the wheel or requesting too much power from the wheel than what it's able to give, those beeps are not gonna matter, okay? So you have to play within the limits of the wheel.
It was cut off on me. So, and I was riding at about 35 miles per hour rate.
That is highly possible. If your battery's low, your motor specs are not up to par, you can actually over torque a wheel well below the top speed of the wheel. But again, like I said, the wheel did beep. So that beeping could be a number of things. Number one, it could be telling you that you're over torquing me, slow down, or relative to the battery percentage, okay, based on how much torque he was requesting from the wheel. Remember, power is voltage times current. So it's a high possibility that if his battery was low, that his current consumption was way too high given the torque that he was requesting from the wheel. And the wheel was literally saying, hey, it's too much, back off, it was too late. And if you didn't hear those beeps, you're going down, which you did.
Here, guys, and the thing is, this is only 15 minutes into my ride. I just turned this thing on, put my foot on it 15 minutes before this happened, guys. And I'm only about 7.5 miles into a full charge.
A full charge, 7.5 miles into a full charge. Now, here's the thing. If you're riding hard in 7 miles on a 1920 watt hour, if that's what it is, or even if it's a 2400 watt hour, if you're a hard rider, especially riding up a hill or whatever, you can actually drain a battery. Remember, this is not a long range wheel. This is not the, you know, EX30 or something like that.
And one thing I noticed is that this thing was absolutely eating the battery. I looked down slightly before this corner, and the battery was teetering between 3 bars and 2 bars. It would go to 3 whenever I'd back off power, and it'd go to 2 whenever I'd get on the power. And then as soon...
Now that doesn't make any sense to me. He would have to release stats for that. But for the battery, he said full charge, right? I'm assuming that there are 4 bars, or maybe 4 or 5 bars. But if it's at full charge and it's eating the battery to the point where the battery display is showing 3 bars when you're on it, I'm sorry, 2 bars when you're on it and 3 when you're letting off of it, then that says a lot about the wheel itself. Maybe the wheel was faulty. It's highly possible. But without showing the data, it's pretty hard to say. Either way, at full charge, there's no way you should be at 3 bars, especially for his weight.
As soon as I started up this little corner right here is whenever it just shut off on me.
it didn't just shut off. Again, it did not just shut off. We both saw that in the video there were 3 beeps at least before the thing cut out. We can even be more conservative to say there was at least 2 beeps before this thing cut out. So it didn't just shut off.
So something's wrong with this wheel.
Nothing's wrong with the wheel from what we've seen. Remember, the wheel did beep. We cannot ignore that. The fact that the wheel beeped means that the wheel functioned as expected.
With the power consumption on it, it should not be eating battery that fast.
Correct. If indeed he had a full charge and the wheel had like 3 bars while he was riding hard, that's a problem. We would need to investigate why that's happening if that's true. Now I could understand why he's upset because, you know, if in fact the wheel did drop from 100% down to 3 bars, that is a problem. But I like to ride with monitoring apps, especially when testing a wheel. And I can't say for sure what his situation was without stats, but from what I've seen, the early analysis is that this wheel functioned as expected. It did beep, it did warn you, regardless of whether the battery was at 100% or not. The wheel did give the rider enough warning to say, hey, back off, you're overstretching my requirements. So let's take a look at Ronan's video, because he did say he was riding around, I don't know, 30 something miles per hour. So makes me think that this wheel is not capable of doing 50, but let's take a look at Ronan's video. Okay, here's Ronan Rider. I'm gonna have to mute his because he may have copyrighted music. So we can see that he's standing, and he said that he's able to do 51 miles per hour on here. So we're seeing that he has, let's see, 50.2, 50.6, 50.6 at 84 PWM. So that's good. What that tells me is, number one, I'm looking at his power consumption, at least his current draw, and I can see that he's not over torquing the wheel at all. He's gradually, sometimes he's even slowing down. He's gradually getting there. So he's not over torquing the wheel in any way. And that's a major difference between how he was testing his wheel versus how Chooch tested his wheel. So these are 2 different tests, and there's no comparison between the 2. Whether or not the wheel can do 50 miles an hour is irrelevant to Chooch's video, if that is what he was doing here, comparing the 2 videos. So you can apparently do 50 miles an hour on the extreme. Can you sustain that speed? Can you torque it at 45 miles an hour to try to get to 50 miles an hour? That's a different question. But the wheel is capable of doing 50 miles an hour clearly. At what torque? Whether you do it aggressively or gradually, that's up for debate. Okay, so that was a quick synopsis there, quick analysis of the video. It was a short video, but what we see is that even though Chooch is lighter, the forward lean was possibly enough to over torque the extreme at the high speed he was already moving, right? Now, Ronan was possibly at a full charge, and in addition, he wasn't seated, nor was he aggressively leaning forward the way Chooch was. He accelerated the wheel towards 50 miles per hour at a gradual rate versus Chooch's aggressive leaning, over torquing the wheel at a much lower rate of speed. Now, the takeaway here is that the electric motors are not like, you know, gasoline motors with varying torque curves and gears that will allow the driver to achieve higher rate of speed at practically any instance. I mean, rather, electric motors, they tend to reach this peak near maximum current output. So you're probably asking, why does an electric motor lose torque at a high rate of speed, right? Well, I did a quick online search as to why that might be, and this is what I found.
So it's due to what is called the back EMF. The motor starts generating a voltage in reverse which acts against the supply voltage. Thus the current flow is reduced, which in turn reduces the strength of the magnetic field, which produces the turning torque. It's an inherent feature of any wound motor. Okay, so the sort of motors found in EVs, for example, have very complex motor controllers which will do things like limit current to avoid burning out the motors. For instance, the current at a low RPM is likely to be limited to avoid burning out the coils. Up to a certain RPM, the controller might be able to maintain the current level and thus the torque. However, at a certain point, the back EMF will be too high to be fully compensated for, and then torque will start to fall away with higher RPM. So this chart demonstrates what the maximum power power and torque versus RPM might look like. In practice, power will start to drop off too as the back EMF effect becomes more significant. There are ways around this by using a gearbox, but one of the advantages of EVs is avoiding the need for such a device in the powertrain. It is the same phenomena that causes the back EMF that is used in regenerative braking. Credit to Steve Jones on Quora for this. So as demonstrated by the chart, you can see that from 0 to about 2300 RPM, that is the speed, the torque tends to remain constant and then completely drops off as the RPM increases, but the power remains the same, you see, as the speed increases. So if you're traveling at a certain rate and you're really close to the maximum power output of the wheel, pushing or asking for a lot more torque or acceleration is going to result in a crash.
If we look at the specs of the Extreme, we see that it's equipped with a 3,500 watt-hour motor coupled with a 2,400 watt-hour battery. Now, if Chooch had the Ewheels version, that would be 1920 watt-hours, I believe. So significantly less than the stock-powered 2,400 watt-hour version. So for reference, in a recent video I posted about what makes a good blitz wheel, I stated that any wheel having a motor size double that of the watt-hour rating of the battery is automatically disqualified as a high-performance machine for blitzing, at least, okay, high competition. So in short, the motor requirements for power can be significantly higher in the case of an aggressive rider. And as we saw, Chooch was quite aggressive. But hold on for a second. The motor size is 3,500 watts. Multiplied by 2 is 7,000 watt-hours if we were to go by my method. So clearly this isn't a terrible configuration because the motor is not exactly twice as big, assuming the stock version at 2,400 watt-hours. What's more is that the Begode Master has the exact same specs as the Extreme on paper. So what could have caused this crash? So the truth is, the machine is not meant to be driven hard on the streets like other high-performance machines, example the Master. My assumption is that Chooch probably assumed his weight would make up for the lack of battery requirement. Remember, he did say the wheel was eating through the battery quickly, but with that knowledge, if you're already pushing the Extreme at a high rate of speed, requesting too much from the overall setup will likely end in disaster anyway. Now, this is not a one-off. We saw that with the S20, now S22. We saw that with the T4, okay? Cue the Canadian riders. And that's just to name a few examples. In addition, battery sag isn't a new issue, so we can't blame that alone. So it's highly likely that the battery in the Extreme at the point of the crash, okay, was already at a low state, which would definitely put it in the red zone, being that the watt hour, right, the watt hours would be well below or near half that of the motor's rating, which again would be well below the hungry requirements of the motor. Finally, we should consider the motor type and how the controllers were probably programmed to handle speed versus torque, as well as the motor windings, right? So it could very well be, as stated earlier, that the Extreme is a single purpose stunt and off-roading wheel. Otherwise, it would be competing directly with the likes of the Master, a wheel designed for high speed, high torque all the time. All right, so what we're gonna do is a quick demonstration of pretty much accelerating your wheel from whatever miles per hour to 45 miles an hour. And then we're going to demonstrate accelerating from 0 miles an hour to 35 miles an hour, and then giving it a hard torque to try to achieve 45 miles an hour. We're gonna put up the EUC World specs and we're gonna see how much current this thing asks for when I give it the oomph, okay? So let's do this. Battery's at 90%. Let's do this. Let's do this seated. We wanna be like Chooch.
You wanna be like Chooch? Yeah. Wanna be like Chooch? Yeah.
No, don't be like Chooch. Be like yourself. All right, so we're gonna start over there and gradually go to 30 miles an hour. Let's go. Nice. All right, so we just reached 30 miles an hour. That was great. My alarm just told me I did. Let's do it. 30 miles an hour to 40 miles an hour. As soon as we hear the beep, we go to 40. Let's go. 40 up. Woo! Oh yeah. I could be a little bit more aggressive actually. So why don't we do that? Let's be a little bit more aggressive. All right, we're gonna do a hard acceleration when we reach 30. Let's go. Because I want to see this on the stats. Go! Woo! All right. Let's do it this time. I'm sure we could do better. We could do better. That was the second try. Let's do another try. I really want to push it. You know what I mean? Give it a real hard torque. Because I want to see it. I want to see it on the charts. I want to see that I dipped it. There's no way I'm going to cut it out unless this thing is, something's wrong with it. Go! Nice. Woo-hoo-hoo-hoo. That was great. That was great. So how much torque did I torque it after 30? I'm not sure. But I know one thing. If your wheel is not at the optimum level with the battery, you're gonna cut this thing out. You know what I mean? But here's the thing though. Seated riding is a lot safer than when you're standing. Because number one, your center of balance, what you call center of gravity, is much lower. So the wheel is not necessarily over torquing, or you're not over torquing the wheel beyond what it's capable of doing in an instant. You see what I'm saying? When you stand up, your body, this part of your body, is well over the front portion of the wheel. So it's like this, well over the center of pivot, as you will, because that's what causes torque, is pivot. So when you're seated, so when I'm standing, see, look how much lean I got. Look how much lean. But when you're seated, right, it's literally just this portion and your shoulders. You see what I'm saying? So yes, it is, you are able to torque the wheel, but it's not a dangerous type of torque. It's actually a very healthy type of torque, both for you and the wheel. So let's do this one more time. All right, going downward. I was going uphill. This is downhill. All right. 30, 40. Woo! Yes! Wow. So what I'm trying to demonstrate here is that the Extreme does not have, or maybe it doesn't have, the required amount of torque at the battery level that Chooch was riding at. The last time I checked, Chooch is a 125-pound rider. So there's no way his weight would be the primary reason for cutting out. Impossible. So we can rule that out. I would have to come to the conclusion that his battery was low. He was probably moving uphill because, you know, that's working against the torque, right? That he's pushing in the other direction. And or the motor windings, okay? So the motor is not really designed for high torque. It is, but in short instances, not over a long duration like this one is, or the Master, or other high performance wheels. But as we stated earlier, all right, an important note is that for most wheels, or for all wheels, okay, since they're all electric and have no gears, there is a maximum current output, a maximum power output, where the torque tends to stop, all right? And then the EMF, or the back EMF, kicks in, and then you gradually lose that torque if you maintain that high speed or increase that high speed after a certain point. The only other thing I can think of is that the wheel, as Chooch stated, was probably faulty. I doubt that because he had the wheel for a little while. I highly doubt that the wheel was faulty, but I don't know. I don't know, it's just an assumption. But in any case, this is something that you might have to take into consideration. Not every wheel can be torqued over a very long distance. But not only that, not every wheel can be torqued at a high rate of speed to another high rate of speed, especially when you're near the current output. Remember, power is what? Voltage times current. And from the video, just from looking at the video, I'm gonna have to say that the power was exceeded. The power exceeded. Because remember, the wheel did beep. It did beep. Gotway is known for beeping. And there's no way it's gonna mess up on that. if it's firmware, it's not like, you know, finicky stuff. It's hard coded into the microcontrollers. So that is my conclusion. Okay, without seeing any data, that is the best conclusion I can come up with, is that Chooch's battery was not at its optimum. His leaning was very aggressive, and the wheel was just not designed to handle that level of torque at that rate of speed. Yes. Anyway, guys, I hope you had fun. Let me go and enjoy this machine.